Fado. I was once a member of the FCA, the Forsa Cosanta Áitiúil. It was subsequently named the Reserve Defence Forces, which was subsequently named the Army Reserve. What we got up to, well, that's up for a different podcast. But what I would like to focus on tonight is who were we? Who we were. Back when I first started, we used to get together once a year during the summertime on a camp, and we'd all be bussed to a particular location. Sometimes, if we were lucky, we'd be based near a major town. Sometimes we were slightly away from the town, and a couple of times we were sent to a place where there was no mobile phone signal and only an old television for entertainment. But anyways, at the end of the day, when we got off those buses, we'd be organised into groups. And so what kind of organisation would we have? Well, I'll just respect the ranks here, and I'll just say that we had upper management, middle management, lower management, and two lower ranks. Who were the upper management? Well, they were the people that had been in the organisation probably the longest. They were very wise people, experienced, who really knew how to run a camp and had the wisdom and the knowledge to be able to step in when they were needed and step back if the situation got out of the way. Then you'd have middle management. They were the people who were responsible for drawing up the program of activities for the 2 weeks, and it would be their job to tick the boxes and make sure that everything that was set out would be accomplished. Then you would have lower management, where they would actually be the people who would be directly in front of the troops and basically make sure that the program was run in an efficient and effective manner. And then, of course, you had the lower ranks. They'd be you'd have the slightly higher rank would have a little bit more experience, and then you'd have the lower rank who'd have the benefit of being able to blend in and behave themselves. Another way of looking at it would be the senior management would be, they'd be in their late 50s and 60s, and they would be prominent members in Mayo. They would be business people, entrepreneurs, people with great organisational skills. The middle management then, mainly they were teachers. Some of them involved in politics. Some of them were members of the bank officials. Then you'd have your lower management, and they would be basically comprised of college, university students, probably in their third or fourth year. Very level-headed people, very smart and intelligent. And then you would have the upper rank of privates, who would be basically first years in college or in their first year of apprenticeship. And then you'd have the lowest ranks, who would literally be young people who had just finished their leaving certs and were getting ready for starting their college careers or their apprenticeship careers. So anyways, we'd all show up at this camp, and we'd be organised into our groups, and there'd be a little bit of administration that'd have to be done. We'd have to sort out our accommodations. We'd have to go through all the different protocols with regards our relationships with each other, and how we were to deport ourselves around the camp, and basically standard operating procedures that had to be adhered to. Subsequently, after that, you'd start the next morning. And this is it. This is where you'd start to see the whole myriad of the whole spectrum of people that was in that organization. For example, the next morning, some of those people say, some of those people would be up at 6 o'clock in the morning, and they'd have their boots polished, they'll have their uniforms ironed, they'd have a proper shave, proper wash. Some would even go for a walk, and then they'd go for their breakfast at 7:30, 7:45, and by 8 o'clock they'd be standing on the parade ground thinking about how they were going to up their routine for the following day. And on the other extreme, you would have persons who would literally, you would not see them, they'd be dead in their beds at about 10 to 8. And by 8 o'clock, they would miraculously just materialize on the parade ground, and they would be clean, sober, and awake. And, it just goes to show that, like, there's so, which kind of person would you like to have on your side on the battlefield? The kind of guy who runs by the book perfectly, and then the guy who's there just in the nick of time. It was fascinating to see, and it amazed me. And for myself personally, I just hover somewhere in that spectrum. Sometimes I'd be late, sometimes I'd be super early. But that was one thing. Another would be our fascination to detail. That would mainly come from how we looked after our uniforms. There'd be some people who'd we had to wear a beret, and some people who were in the know, or who had a member, had a family member who was serving, would know how to perfectly set that cap. And there's a whole technique to shaping that beret, and you really had to, like, if you did not know how to do that technique, you literally had to seek out this particular person, and you'd had to come up to him and say, "Johnny, will you just show me how you did that to your cap? How did you get that cap badge to stand the way it is?" And that by doing that, like, you're building bonds, building relationships with people around you. Again, like, somebody else would know something about drawstrings. For example, we used to have a drawstring around our waist on our jackets, and the problem with them was when we were issued them, this drawstring would be, there'd be nearly a foot long of string just hanging off you when you were going marching, and everybody could be complaining about your drawstring. So naturally enough, you'd have to go to the buddies beside you, and you'd have to say to them, "Look, what are you doing with your drawstrings? Like, what's the story here? What are the permanent? What are the real guys doing? The full timers? What do they do in terms of these drawstrings?" And when we first started out, it was basically, we had to put a little knot into that drawstring, and it looked pretty cook, but it was acceptable. So if one person did it, we'd all have to do it. And if one person did not do it, that person was up for a bit of grief the following parade. Later on, we discovered there was a different technique, and there was a better way of doing it. But again, you literally you'd have to have your finger on the pulse when it came to issues like that. And it showed that, like, that if you were the guy that stood out in the parade ground for not doing these things, it showed basically that you were not gelling with your group, and that you were not forming bonds with that group. Then when you look at it for middle management, or lower management, sorry, we'd be looking after the lower ranks. We'd be making sure that they carried out their lessons. We'd have to give them instructions on particular lessons that we had to do. And for ourselves, we would have to meet up every night beforehand, and we'd have to discuss what exactly were we going to be teaching them. Because again, if we didn't get together and discuss that, well, basically, I would go off and I'd tell them how to do it one way, and then somebody would contradict me the next day. and that would lead to further friction, and again it would reflect badly, or it would reflect on our ability to manage and to run things, and different levels would see that sort of thing, and the motivation was always there to progress up another level the following year or the year after, and so there was always that little bit of competition that needed to be there to stay relevant in that particular role. Then for middle management for themselves, we didn't see them very often, but by God, when they showed up, if the lesson plans were not being drawn up, or if the group wasn't gelling together after the first week, these guys would come in and they would literally take over your group, and they would literally get everything up to speed. And how they managed that, again, it reflected on their own wisdom and experience, and how they were able to you could see how they could take control almost immediately, and they would be able to put their authority into it, and they would take control. And in fairness, like, whenever something like that happened, like, everybody paid attention to them and everybody respected them. And then finally you'd have the senior management, and they would show up throughout the course of the day. You get an unexpected visit, and they come in and they'd have a chit chat with you, and it was great to see. For a man in his 50s, or a lady or a gentleman in their 50s, to be able to walk into a room and get respect, and to be able to impart some wisdom to the people, to the group, and they were listened to, and they were and bonds were made that way, and as a result, by the end of the 2 weeks, firstly, we'd all be getting up at 7 o'clock in the morning, and we'd swear to God we'd stay doing that for the rest of our lives. Secondly, we would have friends we wouldn't have friends, we would have colleagues, people we'd know and trust. And the beautiful thing about it was in our county, and you could go to any part of the county and guaranteed you'd know somebody who is in the same troop as yourself. So that's all I have to say tonight. Take care.